Once again, welcome to the academic session of the national webinar, organized as part of the inauguration of the academic activities for the year 2022-23 by the Research and Development Cell and the Research Forum, Department of English, University College, Thiruvananthapuram. So we have already mentioned this, like the broad focal area for this year's activity is historiography. It's about how to do research, how to re-find, how to rewrite, and sort of make things rewrite themselves or maybe help them rewrite. So when we thought of an inaugural function to kickstart the academic activities, there was no other topic more relevant in today's research domain than research ethics. Actually, we had thought of research methodology. It was Professor Joseph Dorairaj, sir, our esteemed speaker, who suggested research ethics, which in fact is more pertinent today than ever in this changing world, because facts are available at fingertips. Anyone can access any sort of data, and an unawareness regarding the ethical approaches and how to select data, the selection of data, as well as presenting the selected data, all can result in occasional undesirable aftermaths of a work or a study. So the University of Kerala has actually already included a paper on research ethics, as is there in a number of other universities. And a research scholar is supposed to study in detail this paper as part of their coursework. Now, ethics used to be something that was imbibed by scholars and the public in general in the bygone days. Somehow, the present times seem to witness an ever so slight shift in paradigm when it comes to an ethical approach or an upholding of ethical values. Even if it is in the professional life or personal life or even academic realms. Now, why exactly this is happening is a different question altogether. And all we can do as researchers is to direct our scholars and associates into the slightly rigid but humanely considerate domain of ethics so that they make wiser choices. Now, we have with us Professor Joseph Dorairaj, sir, who's a scholar, non-pariah, and an academician widely known for his scholarship and astute vision. He always amazes us by the ease with which he straddles the apparently unapproachable areas of literary theory and ELC, the simple but well-structured way of presenting notions which seemed problematic and incomprehensible till then, till we listened to how he presented it, the clarity of explanation and the coherence of logical connection. To list out his innumerable achievements will simply be not possible. And anyway, much has been said in the morning when Dr. Vijayakumar had welcomed him officially. Still, let me mention a couple of things about his achievements, like more than 60 articles, I believe, 7 books, maybe more than 7, and all of them were well received by the academia. He's a Fulbrighter, as well as an Erasmus Mundi scholar, is a visiting professor at several reputed institutions, has visited several international universities, is an assessor for NAC since 2010, and was involved in preparing the revised NAC methodology. He was also the acting vice chancellor and later dean, School of Letters of the Gandhigram Rural Institute. So, like people say, sometimes we are known by the institution we work for. In his case, I believe it is the other way around. We know of the institute because of him. It's an enormous privilege and an honor to have a scholar of Professor Dorairaj's caliber and stature here among us. And I cannot gauge the mileage his name has given to our event, for our department and our college. Words are hardly sufficient to express our gratitude, but at the same time, it would be unfair if I do not rein in my expressions of gratitude and let Professor Dorairaj take the center stage. So that is why we are all here. So like a research scholar of the Institute of English mentioned or said to me, it is indeed a wave of pleasure. She used the term olam. It is an olam to listen to Professor Dorairaj. On behalf of the R&D Cell and the Research Forum, Department of English, University College, Thiruvananthapuram, and all the participants present here, I extend a warm welcome to Professor Dorairaj, sir. The title of his talk is Academic Integrity and Research Ethics. May I formally invite Professor Dorairaj, sir, to take our hands and guide us through the twin miasmas of integrity and ethics. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, dear friends. Dr. Deepa, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, dear friends, and very special thanks to Dr. Deepa for the warm words of welcome and appreciation. Dr. Saju Stephen, Principal, University College, Thiruvananthapuram. Dr. S. Subramanian, the Vice Principal. Dr. Praveena Thompson, Head of the Department of English, University College, Thiruvananthapuram. Dr. Vijay Kumar, Convener, Research and Development Cell for the entire college. Dr. Anu, Dr. Deepa Prasad, and Dr. Sajna. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. I'm happy to be here in the virtual mode, and I'm happy to note that this marks the inauguration of the academic activities of the college for the year 2022-23. Elsewhere, admissions are going on. In my own university, we have not started the admission process. But in your case, you have already started the academic year, and today you're inaugurating, or you have already inaugurated the academic activities for this year. So I'm very happy, and I'm sure the association will be active throughout the year, and I'm sure you will organize a lot of student-friendly programs. So I thank the organizers, particularly Dr. Deepa Prasad, for inviting me to talk on academic integrity and research ethics. So dear friends, I'll be speaking for 1 hour, roughly 1 hour. After that, maybe for 10-15 minutes, we can have some discussion. Maybe there are some questions and I will try to answer them. So I'll be making a PowerPoint presentation. So please allow me to share my screen with you. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, are the slides moving?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So good afternoon, dear friends. The topic for the afternoon presentation is academic integrity and research ethics. Now, please take a look at this slide. So this gives you the outline, the scheme of my presentation this afternoon. So my presentation this afternoon is divided into 3 parts, not 3 equal parts. So in the first part, I will be very briefly talking about what is academic integrity. So what do we mean by academic integrity? So this will be the first part of the presentation. Now the second part of the presentation, and that will be the core of my presentation this afternoon. I'll be discussing, I'll be dealing with 25 important issues, 25 crucial issues in the domain of research ethics. Then towards the end, that is the third part of the presentation, very briefly, I have just 2 slides. I'll be talking about the research scenario in India, and I'll be highlighting a few issues. So dear friends, this is the scheme of my presentation this afternoon. It is divided into 3 parts. What is academic integrity? The first part. 25 crucial issues in the domain of research ethics. The second part. And lastly, research in India, a few issues. Now, the first part, I'll be talking about what is academic integrity. Please take a look at this slide. So there are 2 key ideas. Now, whenever we talk about academic integrity, we are talking about it in terms of number 1, teaching, number 2, research, and number 3, assessment and evaluation. So academic integrity in terms of teaching, academic integrity in terms of research, and academic integrity in terms of assessment and evaluation. Now the question is, how do we define academic integrity, or what do we mean by the term academic integrity? Just as we have NAAC in India, National Assessment and Accreditation Council, in UK they have an agency called the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education. This is very similar to NAAC in India. Now this particular agency, the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education in UK, they have come up with an acceptable definition of what is academic integrity, or what constitutes academic integrity. So according to this agency, academic integrity includes principles, values, conduct, measures, and systems relating to fairness and honesty Within, number 1, teaching, number 2, learning, and number 3, assessment. So dear friends, 2 points have to be highlighted. So when we talk of academic integrity, we are talking about it in terms of teaching, in terms of research, and in terms of assessment. And the whole concept of academic integrity revolves around, please look at the second and the third line, revolves around fairness and honesty, genuineness, authenticity. Okay. Now, please take a look at this slide. I have also acknowledged the source. This has been taken from the website of University of Southampton 2021. So they talk about 7 dimensions of academic integrity. We will go clockwise. Now the question is, the research that I do, the research that I undertake, is it responsible? Am I responsible as a researcher? Point number 2, do I follow ethical norms, ethical conventions? So that would be number 2. Number 3, my research practices, my research methodology, my pedagogy, are they fair? Then the 4th point, are they honest, genuine, authentic, correctly referenced, particularly when you talk of the methodology that you employ? Then respectful, particularly in terms of social science research, wherein you deal with human subjects, human participants. Do you show respect to the human subjects, to the human participants? And ultimately, the question is your research responsible? Not just academically, but socially, ethically. So these are the 7 dimensions of academic integrity. In other words, there are 5 points when we talk about academic integrity. So the first point is fully acknowledging the work of others wherever it has contributed to your own. Now, when I'm writing an article, when I'm writing my dissertation, when I'm writing a book, I have used to quotes from certain journal articles, certain books. Have I acknowledged them properly, and have I documented the sources? So that is point number 1. Point number 2, avoiding actions which seek to give you or anyone else an unfair advantage over others. In other words, because I want my paper to be published first, do I sabotage others' research works? I will talk about it a little later. So this is the implication of point number 2. And point number 3, ensuring that your own work is reported honestly. I do not doctor the data. I do not alter the data. I do not modify the data. So whatever the data that I have collected, I do not distort them. I report them as they are. So reporting honestly, that is point number 3. And point number 4, ensuring that you follow the ethical conventions and requirements appropriate to your discipline and your institution. So your college, you have an ethical code, a set of codes meant to be observed by the faculty and the students. So in your research, do you follow this ethical code? And there are discipline-specific and discipline-appropriate ethical guidelines, whether you're from the Department of Medicine or Chemistry or English or Life Sciences. So there are some discipline-specific ethical guidelines. So do you follow them? Do you observe them? And lastly, complying with and undertaking your research responsibly, following all necessary regulatory, legal, and professional obligations. So dear friends, these are the 5 dimensions of academic integrity. Now, what are the core values of academic integrity? Now, some institutions talk about 5 core values when they talk about academic integrity, whereas some other institutions, they add one more and they talk about 6 core values. Okay, so the question is, what are the core values of academic integrity? Quite a few institutions talk about 6 core values. So what are they? They are: number 1, trust; number 2, honesty; number 3, fairness; number 4, responsibility; number 5, respect; and number 6, courage. So what is trust? Preparing work that is genuine, something that has not been plagiarized, something that has not been copied. So that is trust. What is honesty? Being truthful about which ideas are your own and which ideas have been borrowed from others, and about the methods and results of your research. Fairness, I have already talked about it, not trying to sabotage others' research work. So not trying to gain an advantage by unfair or unethical means. Responsibility, taking an active role in your own learning. For instance, by seeking out the information you need to study effectively. Respect, okay, you show respect maybe for your junior colleagues, maybe for those who work in the laboratory if you are doing research in science, or if you are doing research in the domain of social sciences, particularly when you go to the fields for data collection, showing respect to the human subjects or the human participants. And finally, the core value of academic integrity is courage, guts. When you know your colleague is resorting to unfair means, unethical means, or taking money from his or her research students, do you have the courage to bring it to the public notice? So courage, taking a stand to address the wrongdoing and defending integrity. So dear friends, so far I have talked about what is academic integrity, and I also talked about what constitutes academic integrity. Now this slide, the last slide of the first part of my presentation, because the title of my presentation this afternoon is Academic Integrity and Research Ethics. So the first part, academic integrity, I have already talked about it. I have already explained what we mean by academic integrity. So the second dimension of the topic, the second part of the topic, what is ethics? Okay, I have 4 points as far as the question, what is ethics, is concerned. Now, the first thing we have to bear in mind is ethics is a vital component of philosophy. Now, if we were to answer a question like what is literature, or what constitutes literature, or what are the elements or what are the components of literature, the question what constitutes literature, we will say fiction, both long and short, drama, poetry, prose, and criticism. So these 5 elements, these 5 components constitute literature. So similarly, what constitutes philosophy? What are the elements of philosophy? What are the components of philosophy? We can talk about 4 elements or 4 components of philosophy. Namely, we talk of metaphysics, we talk of epistemology, we talk of logic, and finally we talk of ethics. So these are the 4 elements or the 4 components of philosophy. So what is metaphysics? It talks about first principles. And the scholastic philosophers, particularly St. Thomas Aquinas, he defined metaphysics as the study of being as being. So that is metaphysics. So the second dimension or the second component, epistemology, okay, as we all know, particularly Foucault talks about it, we all know that it is derived from the Greek word episteme, which means knowledge. So epistemology is one component of philosophy that deals with the theory of knowledge. It asks questions like what is knowledge, what is truth single or multiple? So that is the second dimension. The third dimension is logic. We all know that Aristotle talked about rhetoric. Okay, so how to speak convincingly, clearly, persuasively, how to write convincingly, clearly, persuasively. So this would be the domain of logic. Now, finally, we come to ethics, and ethics is also known as moral philosophy. And how do we define ethics, or how do we define moral philosophy? It is the philosophical study of morality, particularly conceived as a set of standards of right and wrong conduct, or good or bad conduct, or what is legitimate and acceptable conduct, and what is not legitimate and not acceptable conduct. In other words, I do something. Is it morally right or is it morally wrong? I say something. Is it morally acceptable or not acceptable? So that could be the domain, or that could be the concern of ethics or moral philosophy. So the 2 key words are what is right and what is wrong, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what is fair and what is unfair, what is legitimate and what is not legitimate or illegitimate. So this is ethics or moral philosophy. And when we talk of ethics or moral philosophy, we realize that there are a few subfields. We talk of sports ethics, we talk of business ethics, we talk of media ethics, We talk of medical ethics. For instance, you have some problem, you have some minor issue, you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, please take an MRI scan. Okay, so this is not at all required. And later you find out that the doctor owns the scan center. So it is his own center. So he wants to make money. So therefore, he asked the patients to go for MRI scan even when it is absolutely not necessary. So therefore, we talk of ethics in the medical field. So just as we talk of ethics in the domain of sports, in the domain of business, in the domain of media, in the domain of medicine, we also talk of ethics in the domain of research. So we talk of research ethics. And what is research ethics? How do we define research ethics? Research ethics is a branch of ethics that talks about fair, legitimate, honest, authentic, genuine, responsible conduct of research or integrity in conducting research. In other words, we talk of fair research, good research, honest research, genuine research, acceptable research. So that would come under research ethics. So dear friends, that marks the conclusion of the first part of my presentation. So in the first part of my presentation, I talked about two issues. I raised two questions and I also addressed these two questions. So what were the two questions? Question number one, what is academic integrity? And I insisted that when we talk of academic integrity, we talk about it in terms of teaching, in terms of research, and also in terms of assessment and evaluation. So that was question number one. Question number two, what is ethics? I defined ethics as moral philosophy that deals with what is right and wrong. And I also pointed out that research ethic deals with the acceptable practices in terms of research. So dear friends, that was the first part of my presentation. Now in the second part of the presentation, and as I said earlier, this constitutes the core of my presentation this afternoon. I'll be talking of 25 crucial issues. Now, I want to make it clear that not all the 25 issues are equally important. Some are very important, some are not very important at all. But all the same, I would like to talk about all the 25 issues. Now, the first issue, outsourcing the research work or the research project. And this is the most heinous, the most unethical research practice. Okay, what do? Now, you go to a mall, you have 75,000 rupees. So what do? You buy the latest iPhone. Or you have only 15,000 rupees. You go to the Samsung mobile shop and then you buy the latest Samsung mobile. Or you have 20 rupees. You go to the shop and buy a ball pen. So just as you pay money and buy something, there are unscrupulous research scholars all over the country in all subjects, in all disciplines, in all departments, where they pay and buy a research thesis and they buy a research degree. Now, dear friends, all of us are aware of this. Not that we are not aware of this, all of us are aware of this, whether it is English or mathematics or chemistry or economics or sociology, you name the subject, the PhD theses are available. Of course, you have to be a little discreet. They are not sold in the open market, just as mobiles and pens and other things are sold in the open market. All of us are aware of the fact that you can buy a PhD thesis, and not just buy, you can buy a PhD degree. And please read the last three lines. The package includes registration to arranging the thesis reports to conducting the Viva OC. So at the time of registration, maybe you have to pay something like 2 to 3 lakhs. Then when you have the first DC meeting, maybe another 1 or 2 lakhs. When you have the second DC meeting, another 2 or 3 lakhs. Then when you have the synopsis submission, maybe another 2 or 3 lakhs. And finally, when you submit your thesis itself, you have to pay 3 or 4 lakhs. And you wait for the Viva. And after the Viva OC is over, you have to arrange a grand dinner and maybe another 3 to 4 lakhs. So in other words, anywhere between 6 lakhs to 15 lakhs. So that is the asking rate. And all of us are aware of this. of this heinous fact. So just as you buy a mobile phone, just as you buy a pen, there is involved unethical practice that I want to highlight. Now, the second one, you don't buy a ready-made thesis. Okay, but then what do? You rehash or reuse available materials either partially or substantially. In other words, what you do is you cut and paste or copy and paste not from a single source but from multiple sources. And all of us know that there is a website called Shodh Ganga. So we have in fact two websites. One is Shodh Ganga, the other is the Shodh Sindhu. So Shodh Ganga is maintained by the consortium with its headquarters in Allahabad. So what is the Shodh Ganga? Shodh Ganga is a digital repository of PhD theses in all subjects submitted to Indian universities. So it is a digital repository of PhD. So you want to know what are the theses that have been submitted in English all over India. You go to Shodh Ganga. If you want to find out how many theses have been submitted in the subject of chemistry, all these are available in Shodh Ganga. Now, I want to have two clarifications. Clarification number one, not just the title, the entire thesis is available. You name the thesis is available, point number one, and point number two, and it is in the downloadable format. Okay, for instance, my research scholar is working on Manju Kapoor, or somebody else's research scholar is working on, let us say, Rabindranath Tagore. Okay, so you go to Shodh Ganga and find out, okay, Manju Kapoor, how many PhD theses have been submitted to various universities in India? Say some 27 PhD theses have already been submitted on Manju Kapoor, and all the 27 PhD theses are available in Shodh Ganga. And as I said earlier, not just the title, but the entire thesis is available and it is downloadable. So what do students do? Not all students, okay, unethical, scrupulous students, what do? They download, okay, they cut, paste, copy, paste, and eventually they produce thesis. Okay, so the first crime is you don't do any work, you pay and you buy your thesis and buy your degree. In this case, okay, but unethical. So what you do is you go to Shodh Ganga, you download PhD thesis, you PhD thesis, and you get your PhD degree. Now the third one, particularly applicable to social sciences, also to English, particularly if you are doing research in the area of applied linguistics, particularly in ELT, English language teaching. Now what you do is, if you are doing research in social science, research in the field of education, in the field of technology, you're supposed to go out into the field, okay, and collect data, maybe using a schedule or using the survey method or using a questionnaire. You're supposed to collect data, okay, but then what do some unethical students do? They do not go out into the field for data collection. Without doing the data collection in the proper manner, what they do is they create their own data, they cook up data, they fabricate data. Okay, so what do we mean by this? Without conducting the experiments and without undertaking actual field work, sitting in your library, sitting at your desk, sitting in your hostel room with the help of your laptop, what you do is you produce the data, you cook up the data, you create the data, you fabricate the data. I'll share with you a real example. This is not a cooked up or a fabricated example. This is a real example. Now, one particular student I know, he wanted to study the unemployment rate among engineering graduates in a particular state. Okay, I repeat, the title was Unemployment Among Engineering Graduates in a Particular State. Imagine in that particular state, let us say there are 30 districts. So what did this particular student do? He went to 2 districts. There are 30 districts, but this particular student, he went to 2 districts and very faithfully collected data for 2 districts, 100 men and 100 women. So this was his sample. Now for the remaining 28 districts, because totally there are 30 districts in the state, okay, and please remember this is a real example. So there are 30 districts. So this student went to 2 districts. For the remaining 28 districts, what he did was, he did not go out into the field for data collection. Sitting in his room with the help of his laptop, he fabricated data, he created data. So dear friends, this is the third most unethical practice in research, particularly in the domain of social sciences. Now the fourth one, particularly sciences, this happens mostly in sciences, in physics, in chemistry, in life sciences. So what they do is, they conduct experiments. Not that they skip experiments, they conduct experiments, they collect data, but then they realize that the data that they have collected, they are not publishable data. So what do? They alter the data, they modify the data. Okay, now if I were to give an example, okay, a student was convinced that online teaching is detrimental to students. Online teaching is not good. So this was his conviction. So what did he do? He did a minor research. He collected sample from 100 students, boys and girls put together. But when he collected the data, he realized that the result was in the negative. So he thought online teaching is not good, but then the data showed, at least the data that he collected, the data showed that online teaching was good. Okay, so this went against his belief, this went against his conviction. So what did he do? He modified the data, he changed the number, he changed the percentage so that it would go along with his conviction. Now in science they do it. Okay, so they go to the lab, they conduct experiments, but then if they are not happy with the results, so what do? They tweak the data, they falsify the data, they tamper with the data. Even Nobel laureate Mrs. Arnold, she won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 2018 for her work on enzymes, and she had to retract her paper. Okay, so maybe after the talk or maybe tomorrow or maybe later this week when you're free, you please go to the internet and type papers retracted in science or papers retracted in nature. These are the two best journals in the world, Science and Nature, with Science and Nature. Or you go to the medical journal Lancet and find out how many papers were taken down or retracted. Okay, you will be shocked. You go to the web and find out how many papers were taken down by the editorial board of science, or by the editorial board of nature, or by the editorial board of Lancet. All these are respected professors, reputed professors, distinguished professors, but their papers are taken down, their papers are retracted. Why? They have altered data. So they falsifying or tampering with the data so that you get publishable results. Okay, the fifth one, English students, English research scholars, plagiarism, including self-plagiarism. Now, all of us are aware of the fact, if you look into the origin of the word plagiarism, or if you look into the etymology of the word plagiarism, we realize that it has come from a Latin word plagiarius, which means kidnapping. Know this, to put it a little bluntly, plagiarism is stealing somebody else's ideas or stealing some thoughts. Cut, copy, paste without acknowledging. Okay, now there are three issues that I want to clarify. Now, as Dr. Deepa Prasad put it beautifully in the preface, it is research and research. And Newton famously said, I'm able to see far because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. So in other words, we necessarily have to use others' ideas, others' theories, other concepts. In other words, when I write a book chapter, when I write a journal article, when I write a book itself, or when I write a dissertation or a thesis, I have to use critics' words, critics' arguments. I have to quote from canonical books, from standard books, so that my own arguments are strengthened. So that is research and research. And Dr. Deepa put it beautifully. So which means, as research scholars, as writers of journal articles, book chapters, and books, we necessarily have to quote masters, quote from experts. Okay, so that is not the point. Okay, the point is, when you quote from a book or a journal article or a book chapter, do you document it and do you give all the details, the publication details? So in other words, plagiarism boils down to the issue is not about using another's concepts or theories or ideas. We have to use other people's, particularly the experts' ideas, concepts, and insights, because it is research and research. If I need to strengthen my argument, then I have to necessarily quote from experts in that particular field. So therefore, the issue is not about using others' ideas, concepts, and theories and insights. We are welcome to use others' concepts, ideas, and theories. But the point is, you use without acknowledging the sources. So that is a crime. So using others' ideas is not a crime. In fact, that is a welcome feature. But without acknowledging those, so that is a crime. Okay, and in this context, I also want to talk of self-plagiarism. Now the question is self-plagiarism allowed? Okay, I will give you an ambiguous answer. So the question is, what about self-plagiarism? Is it acceptable? Is it ethical? So my answer would be yes and no. Okay, so nobody prevents me, nothing prevents me from quoting from my own books and articles. I said the answer is yes and no. Okay, so this is yes. Okay, but at the same time, the answer is a no, in the sense where it is not required. I repeat, where it is not required or warranted, but still I quote from my own book or article, so that my name gets registered in the minds of the readers, or my impact factor goes up, or my citation index goes up. So which means the quotation is really not required, but I am pushing it in so that my name and fame will go around. Okay, my impact factor, my citation index will go up. Okay, so this is self-plagiarism. So is self-plagiarism allowed? Yes, if it is required, if it is warranted. No, it is not allowed if it is not directly relevant to the argument that you're dealing with. Fine. Yeah, friends, I said I will talk about 3 issues. So I have talked about 2 issues. Now the third issue, particularly from the student's point of view, now I would like to share from my own experience. Now I have seen that some of my own students, my own research scholars, they have problem with plagiarism. Now one particular student told me, so why should I acknowledge? Yes, I have taken this idea from this particular book, from this particular author, from this page, but I have rewritten it in my own language, in my own style. I have summarized it, I have paraphrased it. Okay, not a single sentence has been taken from this particular book. Of course, I borrowed the idea, but then I have couched it in my own language, in my own style. So therefore, the point that this particular research student raised was, why should I acknowledge? Because it is in my language, it is in my style. I have presented it in my own way. Then I have to clarify to the student, look here, there are 2 ways of quoting. One is quoting something verbatim, for which you use quotation marks. So obviously you have to acknowledge, you have to mention from which author, from which book, and which page number. Okay, now there is an indirect quotation where you have paraphrased the quotation, where you have summarized the arguments, where you have couched it in your own language. Now, the point here is the language may be your own, the style may be your own, but the idea is a borrowed idea. The concept is a borrowed concept. The insight is not your own, it has been borrowed, so therefore you have to acknowledge. Okay, so in other words, I'm talking of intentional plagiarism and unintentional plagiarism. So plagiarism, including self-plagiarism, as we all know, is something unethical and it has to be avoided. Now the next one, particularly social sciences, it applies to applied linguistics, particularly ELT, also dealing with human subjects and participants. Now if I am a sociology student, or if I am doing research in anthropology, cultural anthropology, or if I am doing research in the field of education, then obviously I have to go out into the field, either meet students or meet teachers for data collection. Okay, depending on who my target group is. Okay, so now dealing with human subjects or human participants, we have to follow some research protocols, we have to follow some ethical guidelines. So there are 4 ethical guidelines or 4 research protocols. Now the first one, not harming them even unintentionally. Okay, or let us put it negatively. Okay, so negatively it would mean harming them, mostly unintentionally, not getting their free and informed consent, not only informed consent but free consent, not maintaining anonymity and confidentiality. The last one is being intrusive and not respecting their space. Okay, now I'll give an example and that will clarify all the 4 issues. Now the last 2 years have been very oppressive for all of us all over the world because of COVID-19. Okay, so immediately after the onslaught of COVID-19, somewhere in 2020 or 21, okay, scientists and experts in the field of medicine, okay, they were working hard to come out with a vaccine. Okay, in India, we had Covaxin and Covishield. Okay, now when they come up with a vaccine, first they try it out on animals. Then they have the human trials and there are 4 phases. Okay, now in the first phase, where they try it out with a small group, maybe some 50 people or some 100 people, they look for volunteers. Okay, imagine I have volunteered for a vaccine trial. Okay, so there are 4 protocols to be followed. So the first one is, okay, they should not harm me. I should not die in the process, or I should not get terribly sick in the process. Number 1. Number 2, they should tell me what will be the consequences, direct consequences, indirect consequences. So they should advise me, okay, you are a volunteer, we are going to give you this injection, these things may happen to you. Okay, so in other words, they should get my free, not forced, my free consent and informed consent, because I volunteer knowing fully well the dangers or the consequences, not maintaining anonymity and confidentiality. All of us know what it means. I will talk about it a little later. And particularly if you're a student of sociology or anthropology, you're going out into the field, you want to study a particular tribe, okay, their rites and rituals. So what do? You go with a camera and then you film them without their knowledge, without their consent. So you're being intrusive and you don't respect their space. Okay, so social sciences, these 4 research protocols are very important. Now look at the second part of the slide. In general, when you do research, whether it is in the domain of translation or comparative literature or ELT or medicine or physics or chemistry, okay, the 3 important principles or protocols or guidelines would be, see to it that your research does some good. Okay, of course, in medicine, it is easy. In literature, it may not be that easy because we deal with texts and we deal with theories, but all the same, the ultimate principle of doing research or engaging in research is beneficence, doing good. To put it negatively, avoid harm, non-maleficence, and ensure that there is justice. What do you mean by justice? okay, a new vaccine has been discovered, so you want to try it out on human subjects. On whom shall we try it out? Okay, let us take prisoners because they are vulnerable, or let us take a tribal group. Okay, even if they die, this will not get reported in the media, so nobody will worry about it. So subjecting a marginalized group or a weak group for tests and trials, clinical tests and trials. So therefore, dear friends, slide number 6 talks about, as a researcher, what research protocols, what ethical guidelines should you adopt when you deal with human subjects and human participants. So the 7th is a minor one, gaps in storage. Now I am a researcher in English language teaching and ELT. Okay, so I have studied the behavior of students in government schools, let's say in Thiruvananthapuram. The entry will be maybe 10th standard, 11th standard. So I have collected data. Okay, maybe 10th standard, 11th standard. So I have collected data. Okay. Now, when my examiner wants the real data, should make it available, or I have written an article in response to that, I'm sending it to a journal. The editor has some doubt. She writes back to me asking for the original data. So the first few years, I should make the data available to other researchers and editors. That could be replicated. It should be repeatable. For which you need the original data. Okay, and number 2, breach in confidentiality. Okay, I will talk about it a little later. Okay, so and now there is an important question. So the question is, okay, I have done some research, I have collected data. Now how long should I keep the data safe and secure? Okay, now the MLA, because as students of English language and literature, we follow the MLA handbook. Okay, social sciences, okay, linguistics included, they follow, it would tell you that we have to keep the data safe and secure for 5 years. So dear friends, the 7th issue talks about gaps in storage. Now the 8th one, it is not directly applicable to teachers and students from Department of History. So it says inauguration of research in research in medicine and research in the domain of life sciences. They talk about 3 R's. What are the 3 R's? I have used blue color: reduction, replacement, and refinement. So in other words, earlier somebody had killed 100 monkeys, okay, because he or she was trying to find out a cure for a particular disease. Okay, so he had killed 100 monkeys or 100 rabbits or 100 toads. So now you don't kill 100, so you reduce it, maybe 60, maybe 50. So reduction, replacement. Okay, are you sure that you want to try it out on animals? What about computer models, simulations, or in vitro studies instead of in vivo? Why not in vitro studies? And if you have to use animals, by all means, okay, at least ensure that the animals do not suffer greatly. Okay, so this has been formulated by a bioethicist called David B. Resnick. Okay, so the topic is using animals in research. So 3 ethical guidelines: reduction, replacement, and refinement. Okay, point number 9. Okay, not respecting patents, copyrights, and intellectual property rights. Okay, but all of us violate this. I have violated this many times, and I am sure all of you, each one of you, I'm sure you have violated this. Now you take a book published by Orient Black Swan or Oxford University Press or Cambridge University Press. So you have the title page on the reverse. It says intellectual copyrights, intellectual property rights, or this book is owned by this particular press, and for academic purposes and for research purposes, you can photocopy up to 15 or 20 pages, but not the entire book. But what do? Both staff and students, we photocopy, we Xerox the entire book, which is an infringement or a violation of intellectual property rights. So point number 9 is not respecting patents, copyrights, and intellectual property rights. Travel grant and contingency grants, you siphon off some money. So that is point number 10, misappropriation or embezzlement of research funds. Now, point number 11, this applies to literature in particular, okay? Also other subjects, education, psychology, sociology, anthropology, particularly humanities, okay, showing bias or prejudice in your research. Now, please look at the 4 titles, the 4 topics, okay? Now look at the first one. Someone is doing research in Canadian literature, or someone is doing research in Australian Aboriginal literature. Okay, he or she has chosen a title like lack of vision in Canadian Indigenous writers, or lack of vision in native Australian writers. Now look at the title. The title itself is biased, prejudice. Even before collecting your data, even before analyzing your data, you have already jumped to the conclusion that these indigenous writers, these fourth world writers, these aboriginal writers, they lack a vision. They do not have a vision. Even if they have a vision, it is not a broad one. It is not a deep one. Okay, so look at the title, lack of vision in native writers, lack of vision in tribal writers, lack of vision in Dalit writers, or lack of vision in indigenous writers. Or look at the second topic, okay, a student of sociology or a student of cultural anthropology wants to study the superstitious behavior of a particular caste, the superstitious behavior of a particular tribe or region. Okay, once again, bias. Or look at the third topic, somebody in psychology or somebody in the Department of Education has chosen this particular topic, prevalence of low IQ in a particular ethnic group. So even before he or she has collected data and analyzed the data, he or she has already come to the conclusion, oh, this particular ethnic group, they are not up to the mark. They are only average or below average. They have a low IQ. Okay, so slide number 11 talks about showing bias or prejudice in your research. Now, point number 12, it talks about covert practices in research. I have already given you this example. You are a researcher in the domain of sociology or anthropology, and you want to study the rites and rituals of a particular ethnic group, a particular tribal group. So you go to the place where they live, okay, and then you go with a camera and you take photos or you videograph their rites and rituals without their knowledge, without their consent, without their explicit permission. So this is like treating them as an object, okay, and this is unethical. So slide number 12 talks about covert practices in research which are not acceptable. Number 13, stealing data from your colleagues and peers. So this is one dimension. The other dimension is sabotaging your colleagues' research work. Okay, so the first one, I'll give you an example, stealing data from your colleagues and peers. Okay, I'll give you 2 examples, not one, but 2 examples. Now, in science, this happens even in premier institutions with established professors, and some of them have won awards, national awards, even international awards. And there is one particular professor, okay, he is renowned. He is well known, not only nationally, but internationally. Okay, but there is a black mark. What is this black mark? Okay, in science, okay, not only in science, in all subjects, okay, papers are sent for peer review. Okay, and some of these reputed journals like Nature, Lancet, Science, and research journals with a very high impact factor, they send their papers for peer review. So this particular scientist, okay, when he gets some very interesting papers, he will tell his research team, okay, here is something interesting. We will initiate this work in our lab and we will get it published before this particular author gets his or her research findings published in a journal. So this is stealing data from your colleagues. I'll give you one more example. A professor who I know, okay, so he was teaching social sciences and he would ask his research scholars to submit research proposals and suitable questionnaire, because because this was from the domain of social science. So you will say submit a research proposal. So the student will submit a research proposal. Then they will say, okay, for material collection, prepare a questionnaire. So the student also prepares a questionnaire. Now the professor goes through the proposal and he goes through the questionnaire as well, and then he says, oh, it is not up to the mark. So he rejects it and asks them to prepare another research proposal to be followed by another questionnaire for data collection. Now, what did he do? The proposal that he rejected, he sent it to ICSSR with slight modifications, no major modification, with slight peripheral modifications. He sent it to the Indian Council of Social Sciences Research, ICSSR, got it approved. And once it was approved, he has to collect data. So the questionnaire is already ready, because apparently he had rejected the questionnaire saying that it was not up to the mark, but the questionnaire was in fact good. Okay, so he used the research proposal, he used the questionnaire, he collected data, and he submitted the document and later published it as a book and got a few awards as well. So dear friends, I am not fabricating. So this really happened. Okay, and he did it with not just one student, but with many students. So this is stealing data from your colleagues or peers. Now in sciences, also humanities, you can sabotage your peers' research work. Now here is a quote, and I have taken this from Humboldt Research Foundation. Okay, and please allow me to read it. Sabotage of a research activity, including damaging, destroying, or manipulating experimental arrangements, equipments, documents, hardware, chemicals, or other materials needed by others to conduct scientific work. Okay, in schools, I don't know if students do this in college. In schools, maybe some of us would have done it. There is an important book. So what do? We want to use it, and only for my eye. So what do? I deliberately misplace it so that it will be beyond the reach of my classmates or my friends. Okay, I mean, this is on a very small scale, so sabotaging research. So slide number 13 talks about two unethical practices. Okay, stealing data from your colleagues and peers and sabotaging your peers' research work. Now, point number 14, construct validity. Now, in research, particularly in social sciences, we talk of validity and reliability. And whether we talk of validity or reliability, we talk of internal and external validity and reliability. Fine. Now, there is another concept called the construct validity. And what is construct validity? The way we define key terms. And in social sciences, we talk of operational definitions of terms. Okay, fine. Now, the point is, some researchers, they define terms cleverly and cunningly in order to suit their arguments. Okay, I'll give you 3 examples. Okay, for instance, in the domain of applied linguistics or ELT, a student wants to work on the topic teaching English to disadvantaged students. Now, the key term here is disadvantage, marginalized. Now, how do you define the term disadvantage? So there are 2 questions. The first question is, how do you define the term disadvantage? The second question, a more important question, the way you define this particular term, disadvantage, is it acceptable to others? Is it acceptable to the academic community or the research community? Now, you can't have your own definition of the term disadvantage. Anyone who scores below 55 is my definition of disadvantage. Now, the academic community, particularly the research community, will not accept this definition, because if a student is able to score 55%, then obviously he or she is not a mediocre student, is certainly not disadvantaged. Okay, so the way you define terms, you cannot define it to suit your arguments. Okay, now you skip the second one and go to the third one. Okay, I have come across research papers and PhD dissertations talking about the new woman in the novels of, let us say, Anita Nair, or the new woman in the novels of Kiran Desai, or the new woman in the novels of, let us say, Manju Kapoor. And if we ask the candidate, what do you mean by the new woman? Who is the new woman in your eyes, in your perspective? She will answer one who walks out on marriage. Okay, one who is liberated. Okay, now all these arguments are okay, but then how do you look at it historically? Some students, or not some, many students are not aware of the fact that the term new woman was originally coined by the Irish novelist Sarah Grant almost 100 years ago. So what did she mean by the term the new woman? And how do you interpret the term the new woman? So point number 14, it talks of construct validity. Now the argument is very simple. The way you define terms, that should be acceptable to the academic, to the research community. You cannot have your own definitions to suit your arguments. 15 is a very simple point, not acknowledging help taken from others. Okay, particularly in sciences. In sciences, you have the lab assistant, you have the junior assistant, you have the student researchers. So very often professors don't acknowledge the help rendered by lab assistants or junior assistants and student researchers. Now the APA, American Psychological Association, so it makes it very clear. Faculty advisors should discuss publication credit with students as early as feasible and throughout the publication process as appropriate. Okay, so in other words, if you have taken help from a junior assistant or a lab attendant or some students, okay, please acknowledge. Okay, so that is decency. Not acknowledging is unethical. Okay, point number 16, particularly in sciences, of course, this happens in languages, in humanities also, but particularly in sciences. I mean, I say this happens largely in sciences because they have multiple authors. They have the first author, then they have the corresponding author, then they have the second author, the third author, the fourth author, the fifth author, or the sixth author. Whereas in languages, whereas in the domain of literature, either it is a single author, that is the research candidate, or sometimes the research candidate or the research scholar includes the supervisor's name as well. So at the most, we have only two authors, whereas in physics, in mathematics, in life sciences, in chemistry, you have sometimes 6, 7, 8 authors. So the first author gets the credit and the corresponding author gets the credit. The others, they get a small portion of the credit, fine. Now, the unethical practice here is giving authorship to someone who has not contributed directly and substantially. Okay, now look at the second line. There is a Latin expression, quid pro quid deal. In other words, I am a chemistry researcher, you are also a chemistry researcher. When I write a paper, when I publish a paper, I will include your name, and I expect you to include my name when you publish your research paper. Why? Both of us belong to the same lab and our areas overlap. Okay, and sometimes, I'm sorry to say, sometimes it is done for other pressures as well, including sexual pressures. Okay, now there is a long write-up. I have taken this from the Humboldt Research Foundation. When should you give authorship to somebody? Only when he or she satisfies the following protocols, is involved in the research work right from the beginning up to the drafting of the manuscript. Otherwise, you do not give authorship. But in many cases, in sciences, in physics, in chemistry, in mathematics, in biology, what they do is they give authorship to someone who has not contributed directly and substantially for many reasons, usually for two reasons. One is quid pro quid. I'll include my name, you include your name. And secondly, if I include your name or if you include my name, then my impact factor goes up, my citation index goes up, my score goes up. So therefore, please use my name. So this is unethical. The next one, this students from language and literature do. citing from sources that are not directly and strictly connected to your research. As I am writing a research paper, as I am writing the second chapter of my thesis, as I am writing a book article, how do I begin the sentence? Even though it is not directly related to this piece of research, it is not altogether out of the context to quote and then we write. So which means we know for sure that this argument or this quotation is not directly relevant to this particular context, but then we forcefully bring it in. Why? For many reasons. Maybe we want to help our friend, okay, to boost his or her impact factor, to boost his or her citation index. So literature people, we do this, quoting from sources, citing from sources that are not directly and strictly connected to the research. Now the 18th one, quite a few students do this, and a few teachers also indulge in this unethical practice, publishing the same data with slight modifications in different journals. Okay, now look at the 4 different avatars. Basically, fundamentally, the research paper is the same. Some minor changes, some minor cosmetic changes. So paper 1 becomes paper 2, and paper 2 becomes paper 3, and paper 3 becomes paper 4. So what was originally one single paper or document, okay, gets 4 avatars. Okay, look at the first one, Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, The Palace of Illusions, where the story of the Mahabharata has been narrated or retold from a woman's point of view, a gendered perspective, from Draupadi's point of view. So someone has written an article, Myth in Divakaruni's The Palace of Illusions. It is published. Now you modify it. Maybe a few changes in paragraph 1, a few changes in paragraph 3, a few changes in paragraph 7, 8, 9, 10, some cosmetic changes, some superficial changes. So you present it as retelling of myth in Divakaruni's The Palace of Illusions. So the second article is born. Now, demythologization in Divakaruni's The Palace of Illusion. The third article is born. And a rereading of Divakaruni's The Palace of Illusion, a fourth article is born. Okay, so publishing the same data with slight modifications in different journals, this is unethical. Now, related to this, we have a concept called salami slicing. What is salami slicing? It is piecemeal publication of data or findings in different journals. And salami slicing is defined as reporting the results of a single study. The key word here is single study, a composite study in 2 or more manuscripts. Now, what exactly is this salami and what is the salami slicing? Now, if somebody were to celebrate a birthday, we have a cake and then you slice it. If there are 10 people, you make 10 slices. If there are 15 people, you make 15 slices. So just as you slice a cake, you slice salami. So what is salami? Salami is sausage. Okay, and usually you have chicken sausages and pork sausages. So salami is sausage, particularly pork sausage, where you need to slice it. So in other words, it is a single study. You have collected data. Instead of writing 1 paper, you write 2 papers or 3 papers or 4 papers. Now I'll give you an example. Okay, in applied linguistics, in English language teaching, we talk about error analysis, and Pittcodder is the great man, is a great name as far as error analysis is concerned. And what is error analysis? You collect the errors, you gather the errors committed by students, whether it is in the realm of speech or in the realm of writing. You analyze and find out the causal factors so that you can adopt some intervention and corrective measures. So this is the purpose, this is the objective of error analysis. Fine. Now, when you do error analysis, how do you classify errors? Okay, now Pittcodder and others tell us that errors are to be classified in 4 slots. Errors of omission, errors of addition, errors of substitution, and errors of ordering. Errors of omission. I went to Thiruvananthapuram, so 2 is missing. The article, the preposition 2 is missing. So this is errors of omission. I like the Errors of addition where a preposition is not required or where an article is not required, unknowingly you insert an article or unknowingly you insert a preposition. So that would be errors of addition. Errors of substitution, and finally errors of ordering syntax. I went to Thiruvananthapuram. I too went to Thiruvananthapuram. So that is an error of ordering. Fine. Now, those of us do error analysis, we know very clearly that all the four errors together, they form a composite. Okay, together. Now, what do? I have collected some data. Okay, first year undergraduate students, I do an error analysis looking into their composition notebook. So these are the errors of omission, these are the errors of addition, these are the errors of substitution, these are the errors of ordering. Now I cannot write 4 articles. Errors of omission, article 1, errors of addition, article 2, errors of substitution, article 3, errors of ordering 4, article 4. No, why? This is a composite whole. I cannot slice it and convert it into 4 articles. So this is salami slicing. Point number 20 is easy. Sending a research paper simultaneously. The key word here is simultaneously, at the same time, to 2 or multiple journals without informing the editors about it. And students do this. And if we ask them why, okay, I have sent it to 3 journals or 4 journals and I don't expect all the 3 or all the 4 to publish it. Okay, let me hope that at least one editor accepts it. Okay, but we know that this is unethical. Okay, then 21, selectively quoting or misquoting to suit your focus and arguments. I have given 2 examples. So the first example, religion is the opium of the people, Marx. I will not talk about it. Please allow me to talk about the second example. Now, all of us, we know Professor N.S. Prabhu, who is 85 or 87 years old, and he lives in Bangalore. And formerly he was with the British Council, Chennai. And later he went to Welk, Singapore, and he's a big name. He's a very big name in the domain of ELT. So in 1990, in TESOL Quarterly, he wrote a very famous article quoted by everyone who does research in second language teaching and second language pedagogy. So the title of the article is "There is no best method, why?" Now in the first part of the article, Professor N.S. Prabhu makes it very clear, my way of teaching a prose piece or a poem is different from my colleague's way of teaching a prose piece or a poem. I mean, these are not necessarily my strategy is superior or inferior to my colleague's strategy. This is my way of approaching that subject, and that is his way or her way of approaching the subject. Or I may adopt a particular strategy to teach poetry, and yet another strategy to use yet another strategy to teach a prose piece, and a third strategy to teach a novel. So it is in this context, I repeat, it is against this backdrop that Professor N.S. Prabhu said there is no best method. Why? People use very many different methods, and some are comfortable with grammar translation, some are comfortable with suggestopedia, some are comfortable with total physical response, and many are comfortable with communicative teaching, CLT. So therefore, there is no best method. Why? Now, this is the context. Now, if some student were to write, he or she is writing a journal article, and he or she writes, according to Professor N.S. Prabhu, there is no best method. So what is he or she doing? He or she is doing a great disservice to N.S. Prabhu. Why? Because he or she is misquoting the ideas, the arguments of Professor N.S. Prabhu. So this is not acceptable. And point number 22, particularly English researchers do this without actually reading a book or an article. We include it in the references or the bibliography. Why? We want to impress the reader. We want to impress the examiner. Sometimes what happens is, I am not exaggerating, I am not joking. The article runs to 5 pages, whereas the references is longer than the content. It runs to 6 pages, while the article itself is 4.5 or 5 pages. The reference section is even longer than the content, and it is 6 pages. Why? We want to impress the reader or impress the examiner. This is not acceptable. This is unethical. And number 23, all of us are aware of this. We have predatory journals, we have cloned journals, and it is easy to get our papers published. The UGC has a CARE list, CARE, Consortium for Academic and Research Ethics. Okay, so there are very few CARE listed journals as far as English is concerned. But then your university says you can't submit your PhD thesis unless you have 2 research publications. So what do? You are under enormous pressure. So what do? You look out for predatory journals. And what are predatory journals? They accept money and they publish your paper. You pay 2,000 or you pay 3,000 or you pay 4,000. The next day or the following week or the following month, your paper is accepted. Okay, so that helps you in your promotion, that helps you in your thesis submission. But all the same, it is unethical. Why? Because it is a predatory journal and you are paid to get your paper published. Okay, so 24, skipping or ignoring research protocols and short-circuiting the research project. Okay, if you are doing research in ELT, okay, particularly an empirical study, you're supposed to do a pilot study. Then if it is an intervention program, intervention study, then you should have a pre-test, a post-test. Okay, so some students skip this, particularly many skip the pilot study, but then they report as if they had carried out the pilot study. And finally, point number 25, my final point, using the data collected for research for other purposes with or without the participants' knowledge and with or without the supervisor's knowledge and consent. Okay, I'll give you an example. There are 3 examples, but I have time only for one example. Imagine a researcher from the Department of Psychology. Okay, she wants to study the deviant behavior of students. Okay, particularly she wants to find out in a given class, maybe first MA or third UG. Okay, she wants to find out who are the students with deviant sexual behavior. In other words, to put it in simple language, she wants to know who are the homosexuals and who are the lesbians and what is their behavior inside the classroom. Now she has identified the homosexuals and she has identified the lesbians, and she is also discreetly watching them because this is part of her research work. She wants to find out if their behavior is in any way off the tangent, deviant behavior. Okay, now she is not supposed to disclose this fact that so-and-so is a homosexual, so-and-so is a lesbian with her colleagues and with other students. Otherwise, she will be making them vulnerable. Okay, so this data is meant only for research and she is not supposed to use it for any other purpose. But some scrupulous researchers use it for other purposes, which is unethical. So dear friends, that marks the end of the second part of my presentation, wherein I have talked about 25 crucial issues, and most of these are unethical, unacceptable. Now I go to the last part of my presentation, only one slide, okay, because I promised to talk about the research scenario in India. Okay, I have some 6 points and I'll finish it in 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. Now, whether it is an MA program or an MPhil program or a PhD program, all colleges, all universities, all over the country, we have included a paper on research methodology. But unfortunately, this paper is not handled well. It is not effective. And that is why proliferation of unethical research practices. So this is point number 1. Point number 2, there is an enormous pressure to publish. I'll say 2 examples. A is an associate professor. She wants to become a professor, and UGC demands, or your parent university demands, you should have 5 publications or 10 publications. Only then you become eligible for promotion. Or you are a research scholar, you want to submit your thesis, but your university insists on 2 publications. Only then you become eligible to submit your research thesis. So in other words, as they say in America, publish or perish. So there is a huge pressure to publish. There is an enormous pressure to publish, as a result of which, okay, research scholars and research students are forced to look for shortcuts. Of course, this is no justification. Okay, I would like to make my stand very clear. Okay, I only sympathize, but I do not justify their action, but I sympathize even though I do not justify their action. So it is the pressure to publish, the enormous pressure to publish that drives research students and research scholars to look for shortcuts and adopt unethical practices. Now, earlier, till some 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago, universities did not insist on a plagiarism certificate. Okay, now the UGC has made it mandatory. So whatever may be your subject, okay, whether it is physics or maths or English or education or sociology or linguistics, okay, when you submit your thesis, you have to necessarily produce a plagiarism certificate, okay, saying that the similarity index is 10% or 12% or 13% or 14%. Okay, so that brings me to the issue of similarity index. Okay, different universities have set different norms, yardsticks. In some universities, the similarity index is you should not exceed 7 or you should not exceed 10. In one university, it is as high as 25, which in my perspective is certainly not acceptable, but that university has allowed copying up to 25%. So that is similarity index. Okay, anyway, now the UGC has introduced a 2-credit paper called Research and Publication Ethics. And my penultimate point, in Western institutions, in Western universities, they have an ethics committee or a gatekeeper. Okay, I want to do research in ELT. I have prepared a questionnaire so that I can collect data. Now, this questionnaire has to be vetted and has to be approved by the ethics committee. So they have an ethics committee, or someone doing research in the field of medicine, or someone doing research in the field of gerontology. My sister in Dublin, she did a research in gerontology and she prepared a questionnaire, but that questionnaire had to be approved by the ethics committee. Okay, so unfortunately in Indian higher educational institutions, we do not have a research, we have a research committee. In fact, the research committee at University College Thiruvananthapuram is organizing this webinar, but we don't have ethics committee, or we don't have a gatekeeper or an ombudsman. And finally, the punishment for research misconduct is lenient. And only if it becomes stringent, only then people will resort to healthy, acceptable, legitimate, fair, and honest research practices. So dear friends, that marks the end of the presentation. So my presentation was divided into 3 parts. In the first part, I clarified the meaning of the concept of academic integrity and the concept of research ethics. And in the second part of my presentation, I talked about 25 crucial issues, 25 important issues in research. Some are serious, some are not so serious. Some apply directly to sciences, some apply predominantly to social sciences. But these are issues that we need to be aware of. And finally, the third part of the presentation, the last part of the presentation, I talked about the research scenario in India, and I talked about the enormous pressure to publish and how that drives people to adopt or embrace unethical practices, which is sad, even though it is not acceptable. So dear friends, I stop here. Thank you, Dr. Deepa, and thank you, Dr. Praveena Thompson. Maybe 10 to 15 minutes for any questions, Q&A?
Yes, sir, certainly. Certainly, sir.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank
The
you.
session is now open for questions. If anybody has any points to clarify, to add to the discussion, please ask. No questions forthcoming. Actually, sir had compressed his style. into this presentation. We talked about a lot of areas that should be there. I think a question has come in the chat.
Okay, how to look out for predatory journals?
Yes.
Sometimes it is tricky, okay, but I'll give you two guidelines. These are only guidelines. Now, the first one is please check whether this particular journal has been and number two, whether the journal demands any money. Okay, but then I also want to clarify sometimes, okay, worldwide, even good journals sometimes demand money. Even good journals sometimes ask you to take out a subscription, which is legitimate. Okay, so these are two ways in which you.
So maybe without much ado, I'll invite my colleague Sajna, Dr. Sajna, for the formal vote of thanks. Sajna?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So as we come to the end of this academic session of the inaugural program, it is my honor to propose a vote of thanks. Firstly, Professor Joseph Dorairaj, sir. Now, as already been mentioned, sir is not an unfamiliar person. But each time we listen to him, we realize that there is more to know from him. Because the sincerity and dedication that he shows towards each topic that he selects is proven again and again with each presentation. And probably there were many questions, most probably because of the clarity with which Sir has spoken on all the issues, all the pertaining to all the concerns regarding the topic. Sir, I'm sure all the research scholars and all the people who attended this session would be hugely indebted to you for this remarkable session, which will help them immensely in their research activities. So on behalf of the Research and Development Cell, Research Forum, Department of English, University College, let me extend a heartfelt gratitude to you, sir, for taking time off your busy schedule and addressing us. Thanks a lot, sir. We hope to listen to you more in the coming months as well.
Thank you, Dr. Sajna, and thank you, Dr. Deepa, and thank you, Dr. Praveena Thompson. I'm happy that you have this inauguration of academic activities. My only wish is that you organize programs throughout the academic year.
Yes, okay, that will be our endeavor.
Because in many colleges, they have the inauguration, and sometime in February or March, they have the valediction and nothing in between. But I am sure you will be organizing programs throughout the year, particularly student-oriented. My best wishes and my thanks. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. We'll bear that in mind.
We hope to organize more such programs in future, and we look forward to your support and we look forward to your participation. We thank all of you for your wholehearted support for this inaugural function. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Okay, let me make a few additions there. We also have to express our gratitude to our principal, Dr. Saji Stephen sir, and also our vice principal, Dr. Subramanian sir, for rendering all support for this program. We should also thank immensely Dr. Gijoy Joseph, faculty of the Department of Mathematics, for volunteering to help and getting these sessions recorded. Thank you, Gijoy sir. And as already mentioned, there are faculty members from other departments as well. Shamnath sir is there and many of his colleagues are there. So finally, let me express our sincere gratitude to all the participants, all the research scholars. Your participation will definitely motivate us to organize similar functions, similar sessions in the coming months as well. So thank you all once again.
Concluding for now, thank you for your patience. We'll be back with more sessions in the near future.